In this week's video, I'm going to be showing you how I painted up the new Deathleaper miniature from Games Workshop. Oh, I forgot, I need to turn on the Auspex scanner. Now, long before Deathleaper was psychologically torturing the leaders of Imperial worlds, he started out in a birthing pod, something like this. Let's crack the outer carapace and see what's inside. There's 3 sprues and a 60mm base, required because he's got a pretty chunky piece of terrain for him to stand on. This particular build has many small pieces, like 4 different pieces for each leg type small pieces, so be careful around small children and animals. I opted to build in sub-assemblies, allowing easier access to hard to reach areas, but with some issues, as we'll discuss later on. All in all, I'd rate this as a pretty tricky kit. Now, with the more modern kits, they tend to be quite good at having good seating to be able to set the parts, but with the fiddliness and some of the diagrams just being completely unreadable to a novice, I'd rate this a 4 out of 5 on my new HobbyWithOli difficulty scale. Once built, he's primed white and prepared for the painting table. I started off from a base coat of off-white, and to this I applied Reichland Flesh Shade. I thinned this down a little bit with airbrush thinner in order to have it go more evenly into all the cracks and crevices. I did this starting on the torso and then moved on to all the other parts, the arms, the legs, and also the claws as well. Let's next move on to my method for painting the Hive Fleet Leviathan purple armor panels. I started with a purple-black mix on the rest of the carapace, being careful on areas where it's going to touch the white. I then thinned down purple to indicate a transition, so on areas like these spines along the back, I used a thinned down purple to have a bit of transparency going between the white areas and those purple armor panels. I then used Carabog Crimson to help to hide the transition even more. This also shows a sort of saw or new growth area for the Tyranids. They're constantly adapting on the fly, so it would make sense that they're sprouting extra limbs or things like that. I used some Carabog Crimson around the face as well. I paused to pick out some details on the face. This is a really good place to focus most of my energy, just because it's going to be the place that directly draws the eye when people first look at it. I started out with some off-white on the teeth and in the eyes. Over the eyes, I then applied Imperial Fists Yellow to get a really bright, vibrant yellow colour. A yellow ink would probably work here just as well. To get some more definition around the eyes, I applied some Agrax Earthshade thinned down with a lot of water to flow nicely into the recess surrounding the eyeball or whatever the Tyranid equivalent is. I then did some touch-ups around the face. This is going to be a recurring theme as I want this at my highest standard of Tyranid painting. There's a lot of touch-up steps in between the stages that I'm going to explain. After I'd done that, I thought the teeth looked a bit flat, so I applied a bit more detail using flat brown and off-white for some striations, or the little sort of lines that indicate organic bone growth. To finish the head, I applied some slightly lighter purple around the edges of each chitin panel, before switching to pure Vallejo purple to apply more striations at the edge of each panel. This is a common technique used on Tyranids to show their rapid growth and adaptation to any situation. By adding white to the purple, I was able to add edge highlights and some thinner lines closer to the edge of each panel, which really gives a gradient and again helps us lean into that narrative we want to tell. With these applied, the head is done and the final effect is really striking. At this point, I went over all the purple panels around the rest of the model and decided to stick on the legs. I wanted to use plastic glue to avoid the frosting effect that you sometimes get from super glue, so I first used a knife to expose the grey plastic to get a good bonding surface. However, I completely failed to get a good connection the first time, and this resulted in the whole thing falling apart. I gave it a second try and left him a good long time to set before proceeding. I always like to include my mistakes in these kind of videos so that hopefully you can learn from them and, take them into account when building your own Deathleaper. While we're waiting for him to set, let's demonstrate the black and red deadly stabbers that festoon the Deathleaper. I started with Vallejo Black on the claws. Probably the hardest part of this scheme is using bold, dark colours so close to light ones, so a steady hand is useful. But even in the case of mistakes, just go over with off-white and Reichland flesh shade. Next up is Carroburg Crimson, again showing the rapid growth of these death-dealing digits. This also goes over any joints and lesions. It helps to break up the colour palette a little bit, so it's not just pure Reichland flesh shade over the off-white. Here's how it looks before we highlight the claws. To start off this process, I used Mephiston Red and Black to make a brown mix to highlight near the tips of the claws and the sharp edges. There are also some little holes in some of the bigger claws that let you see the inner bone structure, so I highlighted these red too. Next up is pure Mephiston Red, focused on the top edges and closer to the end of the claws. And lastly, the same process closer to the edge with Evil Sun Scarlet. So there we have it for some vicious looking claws, sound effects optional but encouraged. Now a lot of making my models look better for me comes down to the cleanup. So while I do some of that in the background, I just want to thank everyone who subscribed, bringing us closer to the milestone of 5,000 YouTube subscribers. If you're not subscribed and you like what you see, hit the button, it only takes a moment and really means a lot to me. Now we mentioned sub-assemblies earlier, let's talk about why I had a problem with sub-assemblies for this model. One of the advantages to sub-assemblies is they give you nice milestones during the painting process. However, the downsides are shown here. Touch-ups are almost always required when parts are glued together, and if you're dumb, like me, you can miss entire parts altogether, like the bonus stinger sticking out of his back. I guess my inability to see the hidden weapon coming out from behind his back is pretty on brand for Deathleaper at the very least. Now, special tip for anyone trying to build and paint this model in sub-assemblies, the stance is an absolute pain. His base detail is so large and his legs are spread wide apart. This meant that when I tried to stick him to a base to avoid continually wearing down the paint with my grubby fingers, I failed epically. Recommendation from me is to use blue tack, which I grabbed later, or just to build the model as a single piece, which is probably what I would do if I had to paint this model over again. That would avoid the legs coming off and this rare moment of Hobby with Ollie frustration. God, come on. After a bit more swearing and a lot more plastic glue, I stuck him together and left him off the base for now. This then let me clean up and sort the purple on the carapace. If you'd like to share your hobby successes or nightmares, check out the Discord in the description. Myself and the friendly otter-loving folks over there would love to hear all about your projects, so check it out. The final detail on the body is the divisive flesh cape. I'm personally a fan, but Meg is very much not, so what do you reckon? Cool or no kips? Let me know in the comments down below. I started from a base coat of Vallejo purple before using off-white to reblock in the ribs that run out from the body. These got shaded with Reichland flesh shade and then satisfyingly tidied up with a few brush strokes of purple. Nice. I also applied a little bit of Drucci Violet into the recesses, allowing me to move on to the final details. Now before we do the reveal, let's have a quick chat about the base, which I painted with gunmetal, copper and neutral grey for the grating, pipes and concrete respectively. These were washed with Agrex Earthshade and Nuln Oil in mucky random patches. I next applied PVA glue and then dunked the base in Volcanic Island Base Ready from Geek Gaming Scenics, to which I added a few choice blue crystals for the final presentation. And without any further ado, here he is, the Deathleaper. Thanks so much for watching as always. To support the channel, click a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also check out my Element Games affiliate links in the description down below. If you buy from there, you get discounted products and I get a kickback on anything you purchase at no additional cost to you. It really is win-win, so thank you to those of you using those affiliate links. I'll also be live streaming every Tuesday at 7 PM, so come along and check it out if you haven't done so already, though do be prepared for unexplainable otters in the chat. Until then, my name has been Ollie, this has been my hobby, and I'll see you next time.